But thank you for taking time out to have a chat. Like I say, I like to cover as many Fright Fest films as possible, just so that people can get an idea of what's showing, because obviously people are still going to be picking what they're watching when. And I think whilst the website is really good at giving some information, sometimes it's nice to find out a little bit more about what you're getting into. Um, and similarly, like even if people watch this afterwards, they might find out a bit more about the film than they might necessarily do at the screening. So yeah, thank you for agreeing to have a chat.
Yes, and I must say I am not the best businessman in the world, so I definitely, it's something I have to learn is how to market the film and myself. So yes, I appreciate it.
I'll, I will send you my 5-year-old. She made us make her own podcast last year, and she tells me what to post on socials and what we're covering. So yeah, I'll hire her out. She can help your marketing. It's
Thank you.
just such a different world. It's such a different world. It's yeah,
Yeah.
terrifying. Um, but Elliot, we're here to talk about Freaks of Fancy, which is screening at Fright Fest. It's part of the 25th anniversary edition. It's a big anniversary for the festival. How are you feeling about being selected and the screening itself?
Well, I mean, I'm delighted. It's like it is a dream come true. I'm very excited, and really, especially to be part of the 25th anniversary. Um, but yeah, I'm really looking forward to it, and but joining the Fright Fest family, and
It's
yeah,
it,
just
it it
sorry,
is
go
a
on.
family. I would say it is a family, and once you're in, there's kind of no getting out. So I hope I hope you're prepared for that, because these are guys that they champion people all through their career. You've got somebody like Neil Marshall who screened like Dog Soldiers and The Descent, and then he's repeatedly come back with his films. So it is
Yeah,
that kind of environment that does sort of nurture its filmmakers. Once they've screened there, they're very much involved with what you're making next. Is it something that we might be interested in? So, Bright First
yeah.
Family is very much the right term that you've used.
No, I mean, I'm having to pinch myself literally, because it's a dream come true, and hopefully, just to get on that rung of the ladder now. I'm delighted and very excited, and like you were saying, that the guys behind Fright Fest, how they do champion filmmakers, and they're just so it's their passion. It's amazing, like Alan Jones. I mean, he's like a workaholic, isn't he? When you think about him, he's just you just think there can't be enough hours in a day for him with everything he does, and but it's great, and I'm sort of excited to see, obviously what the response is going to be when we have the screening. I'm nervous, but yeah, but I couldn't have asked for more with getting this in at the 25th anniversary.
And I think I'm right in saying that, this film has got the Alan Jones seal of approval, and that in itself is, worthy of going on a poster.
Yes, no, yeah, exactly, and he sort of picked up the sort of guy. There's a slight Guy Maddin element to it, and he really likes Guy Maddin, and yeah, he again to get Alan's seal of approval, that means a lot. Means a lot, and because years ago I first heard of Alan when I was I bought, I think it was the DVD of Suspiria. This is probably 2007, maybe 2008. I think it was about 2008 because it was just before the first Blu-ray came out, and him and King Newman did the audio commentary. And I just really liked listening to Alan and the way he sort of went into, obviously talked a lot about Dario Argento and just when he talked about when he first saw Suspiria, and then of course I delved a bit further, and obviously with his connection to the sort of British punk scene as well. And like, wow, he's just had, and then obviously he's gone on to be really, rightly revered as a broadcaster, writer, and just doing working with Vivian Westwood and that whole punk thing, and then getting into Sin Fantastique and onwards. And I just thought, I wonder, when I was actually starting to develop the Freaks of Fancy, I was thinking about approaching Fright Fest, and would it be something Alan would like? And this is sort of 2.5 years ago. That's I thought about it, and obviously you fast forward, and here we are.
And where did the idea for the Freaks of Fancy come from? Because there's always that, one little nugget. Where did the idea come from?
Uh, Truthfully, it was some short radio plays that I heard. It was actually on, I can't remember what website. It was like a horror website with just like archived sort of radio, half-hour radio, very old archived horror radio stories. And it was by a guy. So they were 8 short stories that were broadcast on, and this is in about 1960 or 1961, for like a US military base in Japan. And it was the radio station, I think it was called Far East Network. And the guy that wrote these stories was a guy called William Verdier, who did write, I think he wrote for some TV shows that in the 1940s or early 1950s in Hollywood. And then for whatever reason, he ended up going to Japan, and he wrote these 8 short stories for this series called Macabre. And one of them was called Weekend. And it was sort of about these 4 medical graduates that are tricked into going to an island mansion to their medical instructor and mentor. And that sort of I just thought that would make a really good film. Obviously, there's a sort of, mad scientist element and a slight sort of Agatha Christie, Death on the Nile feel to it as well. A bit of, Robert Louis Stevenson's Jekyll and Hyde, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. There's all those little bits mixed in. And so that gave me the idea. And I've obviously acknowledged that in the opening credits. Obviously, sadly, this was, you're talking 60 years ago, and I think he was in his 50s or 60s then. So I doubt, and I can't find anything about his estate. So I just put, loosely based upon. And that was basically the framework. And obviously, I've changed it to an inland, freshwater island in the Lake District. I think it was supposed to be somewhere in the Pacific, like somewhere off California, so it would have been as an island off the coast. So I just changed it to the Lake District and to the 1920s, because that, I think, was set in the 50s, and added in a sort of Art Deco aesthetic to it and a sort of silent movie look. Yeah, but that was basically the sort of fetal origins of it, if you will.
Mm. You mentioned the visuals there. That is, I think, one of the most eye-catching things about this film is it's got a very distinct visual style. You just talk a little bit about how the film looks and what the thought process was behind that, because I think this is going to look very different to a lot of the other films that are screening at Fright Fest.
Thank you. So yeah, because it's set in 1927 and 1928, and obviously there's that Art Deco flapper aesthetic. I just thought, what if I tried to, recreate that look of silent movies as a way of maybe trying to get the viewer more feeling like they're there, rather than sometimes, like, I think when you watch a period film, like when it's really like beautiful and squeaky clean and very sort of ultra high definition looking and really polished, sometimes I think you feel like you're watching modern day actors dressing up in costumes. Sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes I get that feeling. Or certainly with the budget I had, I felt that it might look like that, and I was like, how do I give it that so that the viewer watches it and they know it's set in the 1920s, but maybe they feel like they're watching old silent movie footage. So that was sort of why I did. And also the tints for the different scenes, they used to tint, for people that are interested, they used to actually hand paint the film to tint for different scenes. So in a lot of silent movies, for like, they would have sepia for a general look, which could be interiors and exteriors, daytime. They could use amber And for like night scenes, particularly if there's the moon, they'd be blue, they'd tint it blue. Passionate scenes like a magenta tint, scenes where there's like a fire, like an open fire or something, or a passionate scene, they would have like a sort of shade of red, and so on and so forth. And so I just try to, honor that and sort of make a nod to that to give it that look.
Mm. And yeah, that kind of leads me nicely into my next question. The film is, it's set during the 20s, and it does very much feel of that time, right down to, the performances, the acting. Acting was very different back then. There was a very different style. How much did you work with the team to ensure that, they were getting it right? Because I think both the visuals and the performances are what really sell this as, potentially being, like you say, like a lost film that's been uncovered from that era.
Yeah. Well, Holly Lovelady, who plays, there's quite a noticeable character called Kellyanne in it that has the classic flapper, sort of dark flapper bob. So I showed her like some footage of Louise Brooks, the famous silent movie actress, who's a very iconic flapper girl actress, so that she could see the way she moved. And some other sort of, I showed, it was Rupert Julian's Phantom of the Opera with Lon Chaney and Maggie Philbin. I showed that to the other actors so they could get that feel to sort of try to mimic the way they walk, and that's slightly, probably because the film was obviously shot at a lower frame rate then, and then it's slightly sped up. It gives that slightly jerky feel. But so basically that, showing them some old footage of some classic silent movies, and also, like I said, with the Flapper Girl character, I showed Holly a lot of footage of Louise Brooks and Colleen Moore as well. So yeah, so that she could really get that Flapper Girl look and feel.
It must have been quite nice for them because they're all a relatively young cast. They don't necessarily spend their time watching films probably from outside of their own birth era. So to get to sort of show them the history of film and where their performances where acting has come from. It must have been quite like a nice learning experience for them themselves.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you're right. I mean, there's a few actors who are sort of middle-aged to older. I hope they don't mind me saying that. They're not, but compared to, they're not Gen Z, but then the main cast, like you said, three of them are sort of Gen Zers, and I hate labels, but they're just for as a convenient point of reference, they're very young, and yeah, they enjoyed it. They really enjoyed it. But yeah, I mean, Holly, for instance, she once I showed her it, she was fascinated, and she loves that look as well. She finds the flapper look really, I mean, it is a very unique look. It's something personally I just love that 1920s aesthetic. I think it is the Art Deco thing, and that flapper style is very unique. Quite in some ways timeless, I think.
Mm. Yeah. And I mean, how do you think that, genre films have changed since the 20s? Because obviously it was, around that time that cinema was being born, and we had, one of the first genres that we had was horror. How do you think that, films have changed since then? And do you think that maybe, modern cinema kind of needs to go back to basics a little bit sometimes?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, how it's changed. So, like particularly with like how the horror genre, like you said, so like for instance, like early horror to horror now, how it's changed. A fair, is that like something you wanted me to comment on?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Um, Yeah, I mean, because like you said, it was one of the earliest genres in cinema. Like the 1920s gothic expressionist films, which again I watched a few of those German expressionist movies to get a feel for the aesthetic as well. How they changed, and then so I guess the 20s, and then in America you had the mid to late 1920s and then the early 30s with the Universal horror films, and they would have like someone changing, and they'd obviously show the person, and then it would cut away to a girl looking scared, and then cut back to them, with more hair or whatever. And obviously, then as we went through the decades, they started to use stop motion effects, and then like probably like a really sort of amazing change was probably like Rick Baker doing the makeup in American Werewolf in London, where you see everything, and obviously that's pretty much all practical effects. And then of course you went into CGI and a lot of computer generated. I mean, so yeah, how we could maybe get back to, I think, yeah, with one thing that's become popular with, I guess, post millennial action films and horror films is like a lot of really fast, flashy sort of editing and a lot of CGI. Although there are some people starting to use practical effects again. I think, yeah, maybe we've lost that focus on the psychological aspect, the story and how, like, for me, I think like horror is like, it has always been. I think why people are fascinated with it is that there's this sort of human psyche. It's a way of exploring the human psyche that maybe other films don't quite have that, because there's no real boundary. Well, there are boundaries, but you can, because it's horror, people suspend their disbelief, but then within that you can introduce very social issues and themes to do with exploring the human psyche. And I think maybe with a lot of very flashy films that are exciting in so far as they're like a roller coaster, and you just watch it and it's just, it hits you with this constant sensory assault. Maybe that it does lose you do get a bit desensitized and it loses the psychological element. So I think maybe a way of maybe getting back to that, maybe just like a combination of, I mean, if I'm going, I apologize if I'm going on a bit of a preamble, like maybe maybe an emphasis on a combination of like, practical effects and CGI when needed, but maybe if people can dial back on that. I mean, it depends on the type of film, but yeah, maybe if there's more of a focus on building an atmosphere, mood, maybe trying to create music, because I try with the music in this as well. I tried to have music that was a little bit more, I mean, there's always things that can be improved, but I guess I try to avoid too many sort of jump scare sort of sound effects. And maybe if we could get away from that a little bit, I mean, it's all a matter of opinion, but for me, maybe I'd like it if we could strike a middle ground, I guess.
Yeah, no, I agree. I kind of feel that a lot of the time, less is more. There's
Yeah.
things are always far scarier in your head than when you see them. I mean, the amount of films that I've been told, oh, don't watch this film, is, it's terrifying, or, it's super gross or whatever. And I've built it up in my head, and then I've watched it and I've gone, oh, well, it was much worse in my head, and I think sometimes
Yeah.
if filmmakers kind of stop to step before it can, because it's like, I mean, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it was revered as one of these, like really
Just
gory,
thinking
grotesque
about
films. Yeah. And,
just as you said it.
yeah, and then you watch it and there's not really that much. It's all implied, and in your head you're remembering that you saw this, that, and the other, when in actual fact you didn't. And I think that, is kind of maybe where we should be focusing our attention is, let's actively engage with the audience and, trick them in a way. Let's make them think they've seen something horrific when we haven't necessarily.
Absolutely. No, you hit the nail on the head. And when just before you said Texas Chainsaw Massacre, that's exactly what I thought. I agree totally. And it had such a bad reputation for so long. Like I know it's in recent, maybe in the last 10 or 15 years, there's been quite a few of these sort of franchise. I'd lose track with all these different Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies. But the original Toby Hooper one, like when I was really young, I remember hearing an older boy at school had said he'd watched it and he got it because it was a video nasty at one time. And I just remember thinking it sounded terrifying, just him saying it. And I told my mum, and she was like, "You're not watching something like that." And then eventually I did see it. And like you, I remember thinking, it's not as brutal as I thought. However, there was something that I found captivating about it because Toby Hooper was able to create the atmosphere is so, it's like a dirty, horrible atmosphere. And it makes you feel really uncomfortable. And he did it beautifully the way, it's and even every time I watch that film, I'm still impressed how he was able to pull it all together. I
Yeah,
agree. And
yeah, it's definitely one that's stood the test of time. It's 50 this year, and it's still
unbelievable. 50 years, I know. And the soundtrack is amazing as well. It's very like dark, and it's a very timeless soundtrack. If you just listen to the soundtrack, it could be done now. I think yeah.
Mm, mm. I guess my final question to you, with Fright Festers currently trying to figure out what they're going to watch and when, why do you hope that they take a chance on the Freaks of Fancy?
Yeah. So if you want to see something, that's a little bit different, that does work on very much building an atmosphere, and then there's a tension, and there is a release. You've got to wait for it, but there is a bit of a release, and I hope when people see it, I think they'll enjoy it. But it's not. I hope it avoids some of the pitfalls, or I think of where if you're looking for something that isn't too stylized, that has a unique atmosphere and a look, and that it does sort of ultimately, that there is that release at the end of it. And also, if you want that sort of classic sort of gothic horror, the very early days of gothic horror cinema, that kind of obviously that aesthetic, that's something also that you'll get. But
Yeah, and Alan Jones approves it. So, if Alan says it's good, then everybody should be watching it, right?
yeah, exactly. I was gonna say I didn't want to sound too big-headed. Yeah, and of course, Alan. I mean, that is he doesn't suffer fools gladly, Alan. So I was sweating it, but when he said he liked it, I was like, oh my gosh, that was so a dream come true. So yeah, Alan likes it. So please, if you like Alan's recommendations, get on down.
Definitely. Well, I'm going to wish you best of luck with the screening and enjoy your Fright Fest.
Thank you very much, Kat, and lovely speaking to you.